Welcome in, everyone, once again to Southwestern Chat. Mike Crow, the pastor here at Southwestern Christian Church on Lyle Road in Weatherford. We're visiting with Joe Hardesty, one of our elders here at Southwestern. Been an elder a little bit over a year. This is the redo, part 2. Joe, welcome back. You didn't get scared away the first time, so I'm glad you're back.
Right.
We talked a little bit last time about leadership, and I would encourage anybody to go back and look at that part 1 with Joe. Just hear his heart for Southwestern, and not just for Southwestern, but you'll hear more about that as we go today. But let's talk about leadership. You talked about meeting Jesus at an early age. I think you said 9.5 years old, and then eventually landing here in Weatherford, and eventually moving into leadership here at Southwestern. A lot of different hats. You do a lot of different things. I'm going to say it, you punish yourself in a lot of different ways, going different directions all at the same time. Tell us a little bit about your heart for leadership for the church.
Yeah, I think that a lot of all the leadership has to do with, we talk about servant leadership, where I think that leaders are to serve. You look at Christ's example whenever he tells the disciples to love each other as he's loved them, and you look back at what he had done for them up to that point. He had served them, he had fed them, he had cared for them, he had taught them, he had washed their feet. All of those things went into what he had done for them. And then he says, okay, now go love each other as I've loved you. And that's how they'll know who you are. They'll know that you're my disciples because of how you love each other. I think that was kind of his call to loving, but also a call to leadership, because he's talking to his disciples that he's sending out to make disciples of others. This is part of your Great Commission. So I think that falls in. I think that leads into leadership also, where you're called to love on others and care for them, and caring for others is a large part of leadership. You can look at any example of a leader. The leader of the family is going to love their family. The leader of a church, the church family. We're a church family, and we have leaders, and we're wanting to love on others as part of that leadership. And any time that we come together, if it's painting walls or teaching a class or leading a celebrate recovery group or any of those type things, you're taking that opportunity to love on others. It's love somebody doing any of those things.
Yeah, you mentioned painting walls. If you hear something in the background here, there's a team of people that are doing things here as we're recording, and so that's part of who Southwestern is. There's always the Sunday and Wednesday gatherings, but there's things throughout the week that people are involved in. And it's one of those things that we talk about, loving people. So if you hear something in the background, don't be too shocked by that. Going back to the leadership thing, though, you're in your mid-40s now. Your dad was a leader in the church. Tell me how leadership has changed, specifically in the church, not just in the secular world, but how has leadership changed over the years as far as you're concerned in the church?
Well, I think there's a view of leadership that is definitely a top-down view that became popular in church leadership, where you had elders that were overseers, but instead of leading people through their daily life or leading people through life, they were more about managing the church, managing money or managing the building, managing the staff of the church, the pastor or the youth pastor or associate pastor, any of those positions. It became like a corporate feel to it, and I think that now, but I saw that probably a little bit growing up. I didn't really know a lot about it growing up. Dad went to meetings, and there were conversations that were had there and things like that, but I didn't really know what they were all about. But being whenever I was a deacon, sit in those meetings and the conversations that we're having and decisions that are being made, it does start to feel a little bit more corporate than spiritual. And I think that now we go a different direction.
I hope so.
I think that there's a in kind of a more than one tier, actually, giving more ownership to the ministry leaders, ministry teams, more ownership of what they do and decisions that they can make for themselves, so that the leaders don't have to be like, we know, and we'll check and make sure everything is spiritually and doctrinally on track, but we're not going to, tell you what you have to do with everything. You're adults, you know. Um, but also, I think that we shied away from or moved away from, for whatever reason, the idea that the elders were, you know, spiritual leaders. It was about preaching, teaching, praying, that kind of leadership. It wasn't about money or even hiring or firing people or any of that kind of stuff. It was about the spiritual guidance and the spiritual walk of the entire congregation. And I think we're working to move towards that direction.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of, I can think of decades, the 80s and 90s, the church that I grew up in. My dad would take me to a deacon's meeting or, whatever the church leadership meeting was at the time. And I remember just being a fly on the wall, so to speak, and observing and seeing things. And like you said, it was almost like the corporate world had kind of influenced the way of the church. And this is not a us versus them, or we've got it figured out and they didn't have it figured out. I don't want that, the perception that people have. I don't think that's our perception, but it is going back to the way that God, the Apostle Paul, others have intended for the church to be led, and that is the spiritual leaders that the elders are called to be. And so that's why Restoration Church is so important to me, is going back to what does the Bible say, and whatever the Bible says, that's what we need to follow. And again, we don't have it figured out. We're definitely not, much further ahead than they are. It's a lot of living by grace.
Right.
Tell me about leadership in the home. And I'll just ask you this and tell you why I'm asking this, because I'm convinced, Joe, that because of busyness of life, because of we've moved past the Ward Cleavers of the world, and men have kind of shunned their responsibility in the family. Give me some thoughts about leadership, not just in the church, like your dad led in the church, but you talked about the last episode, you talked about leadership in the home. So speak a little bit about leadership in the home and where that's lacking or not lacking. Tell me I'm wrong, maybe.
Well, I think there's probably a lack of leadership in the home across the board. I mean, there's obviously there's going to be examples of people, different situations where you see better leaders or not good leaders and things like that. But I think overall, I think that there is a biblical model to follow where you have a head of the household, but you also have the husband and wife team. I know there's a lot to say about that. That it is the model that is there for raising of children and things like that. And I think like you said, the busyness of life. I think we've gotten busy with the raising of children. There's a lot of busyness that goes into it now. That even with my kids, they're basically 24 and 25 now, and so even when I was raising them, it was a little different at that time than it is now, as far as how busy people get just going to all of the things and doing all the things. Like we've got to keep everybody hooked up doing something all the time, and it's just like, oh man, I remember, I remember telling my kids, pick one thing, if you look at sports, like I expose them to different types of sports, and then it's like you get to a certain age and you're like, all right, pick what you want to do, and I'm going to focus on that one, and if you want to change it later, then we can change it later, but I don't want to do, 4 seasons a year, and you're doing 2 sports at the same time, and man, it was hard enough having 2 that were doing 2 different things, and then you're like, yeah, I got to go to 2 different things this week, and we just get busy taking the kids places and not spending time living life with them, and
that's a good point.
Even just I look at like my grandkids and how much they get read to. I think about that, and like taking the time to sit down and read a book to them, and just having that connection and slowing down to do it.
Yeah, why do you think it is that busyness became a way of life? Just seems like we equate success or busyness with living a life. And I like what you said about, we've got to stop and just live life with them.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems to be, it's a cultural thing, I think, where people, um, um, my kids do, you know, uh, basketball and volleyball and soccer and whatever, and so it's like, oh, you've got all these different things that your kids do and things like that, and thinking maybe a fear of missing out. I think you get that. You get the fear of missing out. I think that's part of the maybe it's a generational thing where it's like I don't want my kids to miss the opportunity to experience this sport or that sport, or you know, I want them to so that they can be at whatever sport that they're doing. So I need them to play on these extra teams and things like that. Or, academically, it's the same thing. I need my kids to go to this camp or that camp. Where you're doing, or band camp, or I want my kids to be as successful as they can be, but I also want to have time where I get to.
You don't have to introduce yourself every
Right,
time you
yeah.
see each other.
Yeah. I want to be able to spend time with them, and it's like, and like I was talking about with the book reading with my grandkids, I was thinking about it, even today, how many books I read to my kids. Took the time to sit down in my lazy boy and my kids climb up my lap and actually read a book, and then I see them um, reading with their kids, and then the times that I get to read with their kids, and just like that I think my grandkids get read to more than I read to my kids, and I'm like, God, I feel bad about that. Like, man, did I miss out on the opportunity to just read a book with my kids? I know I read to them, but I think that they're job than I did.
Yeah. I think we all experience that the older we get. At Southwestern, we talk about love God, love people. And that's not original with us, of course. Jesus himself said it in John, or Mark chapter 12. He says it in several different places. But give me your 30-second blurb on what does it mean to love God, love people?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, of course, the love God. When they asked Jesus, what's the best commandment? What do we got to do? Or you look at the where he says, what do you have to do to gain salvation, or and he says, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. The separating of the different things you have to love God with. Um, it's physical, it's mental, and it's spiritual. And so we need to physically love God. So what we're doing, where we're volunteering, where we're serving, showing Him to others. And then the mental, like the thing, what we're learning, what we're taking in, what kind of material we're putting into our head, and, what goes in is what comes out, things like that. And then spiritual, like actually focusing our spirit, our soul on God and God's ways. And so you have the different ways that we love God in that way. So loving God above all and putting Him first is what I would say with that. And the love people, the one where they ask him, they follow the follow up question of who is my neighbor. When he says love your neighbor, he says who's my neighbor, and he goes into the Good Samaritan story. Well, who is your neighbor? Well, your neighbor is the person that you see as less than a person, because at that time the Jews saw Samaritans as being less than. They're like half a person, not really a person, kind of a half a person. It's like, well, Jesus is looking at him going, "You're not as good as you. That's who you love. That's who you love. That's who you have to love." And so, or love your enemies as you love yourself. You're like, oh man, now who are we loving? We're loving our enemies. We're loving the people that we think are less than us, and then we have to love ourselves. I mean, who's going to love anybody more than you love yourself? I mean, we're pretty egocentric,
Right.
And so, finding ways to do that, where you're able to serve others and open yourself up to others, to show them the way, because we know our hope is in Christ, and we want to share that hope with others, and that's how we love them, is to share that hope with others.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I love how it's a good segue perhaps to more of your heart. So there's something we do here at Southwestern, and I say we. You kind of lead the ministry here for Celebrate Recovery. It's not a Southwestern Christian church thing, but it's a kingdom thing. So tell people about your heart for Celebrate Recovery, what it is, what the goal of Celebrate Recovery is, who you're seeing, how you're loving people.
Yeah, Celebrate Recovery is it's a Christ-centered recovery program. So it's a 12-step program. You think about AA and A and stuff like that. The issue you have with AA and NA is that they don't tell you who the higher power is, and we know who the higher power is, our Jesus
That's right.
Christ.
Yeah.
And we don't want to leave that ambiguous. We are a Christ-centered recovery program, and we've partnered with other churches. When we started this, it's been 9 years of it. We've been here doing it for a year now. We've grown. First time we met, I think we had 4. This last week we had 37. The week before that, 35. The week before that, 42. It's like we've grown into a larger group.
I'm going to push pause here for a second. Numbers are one thing, and that's evidence of fruit or whatever. But when you mention the word grown, give me a. I heard Tony Friesen, who serves in the CR, talk about how God is growing people, not just number wise, but how God is using CR to grow people. Give me an example of that.
Oh yeah, we have some of the people that come are coming because they have to. I mean, there's different programs. If they're on parole, they have to get signatures that they went to meetings, or if they're in treatment court, which is through the Ouachita and Custer County court system, where people, you have to go to so many meetings a week and things like that. So you have people that come that are basically just coming for a signature, and people sometimes kind of look down on that, but they're here for a signature, but I'm here for them, and it's an opportunity for God to get a hold of their heart through us. And so, I have one that has been coming for over a year. He actually is done. They get done with the program. He doesn't need a signature. He hasn't needed a signature since last May. He hasn't needed a single signature since last May. He's still coming.
It's awesome.
And he's a very good. His witness with his walk. He serves in a church now. He serves with us a little bit. Helps out with CR. His wife is involved with us. It's a very, just seeing somebody like that where, sure, the first time he showed up, it was to get a piece of paper signed, and now he shows up because he wants to, and it's part of his heart. And, growing that type of ministry where it's like he probably had a little bit of a relationship with God before, but I think the opportunity that CR has to really change the way you walk with God through studies and the time, there's tenements in it where, reserve a daily time with God, in order to know His will for my life. I mean, that's, if I can get anybody to reserve a daily time to spend time with God, to know His will for their life so that they can change the way they walk with God. I mean, that's, that changes a person, that changed me. I first started going to CR. I was there to push buttons and put slides on screens. It wasn't about changing my life. I wasn't, volunteering to do it to change my life. But I can tell you that 9 years later, I'm a different person because of it. I've grown through CR. My heart and my walk and my soul has changed because I have done the things that Celebrate Recovery has that, it gets you closer to our higher power, Jesus Christ.
Isn't it amazing that sometimes we, I say we, as people who've been around the church forever, think that church is Sunday, that church is Wednesday. It's very programmatic. It's very formal. It's very this, that, and the other. And oftentimes, and I don't know if this makes sense or not, but for me, I think that a lot of people just minimize the impacts that things like CR can have, or Financial Peace University, or any of the, the relational ministries that we've talked about, man to man, woman to woman, relational ministries, and they're just kind of secondary options for getting people into the church. In other words, we treat people like a project instead of like Jesus would treat them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that we definitely need to ourselves or let God help us overcome that, but also influence and teach others to do the same. Yeah. Thank you for your heart, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate your service here at Southwestern. Thank you for your time again today, and thank you for your heart for Celebrate Recovery. Appreciate what God is doing.
Yeah, thank you for having me.